Hi, this is Simon Upstall and welcome to another tutorial for Apple Motion, and today we're going to be taking a look at this paint splash effect. So anyway, this is quite a fun effect and I think you're going to enjoy it, but I'm afraid you're going to have to excuse my appalling summer cold which has bugged up my nose. But anyway, I hope you can understand what I'm saying and let's get down to it. Okay, for this project I'm going with 1920 1080, 25 frames a second and a duration of 5 seconds. The first thing I'm going to do is come over to the library and bring in a background. So I'm going to come to Content and I'm going to type Concrete in the search there, and I'm going to grab Concrete 03, bring it in here, come over and let's scale it up to I think 110%, so we've got plenty for when we do our camera shake. Let us come to tiling and random tile, and what this does is it kind of takes us further away from the texture. It looks like we're further away, I think, because we've got more detail. Let's also add a color and hue saturation. And let's bring down the value, something like that. So let's call that BG for background. Let's make a new group. Let's grab our text tool. Let's type the word splat in a suitable font. Center it up. I'm going to make it nice and big. I'm going to center it up here. Just bring it down a little bit, maybe like that. Perhaps give it a little bit of rotation as well. Splats are always good if they're a little bit rotated, I think. So let's come over to Appearance and let's turn on 3D. Let's increase that front edge size to something like 10. And let's just choose some material for it. I think I'm going to go for stone grey granite. So there you go, that's our text. So let's call that group text. Then what we need to do is we need to grab a particle. So I'm going to do this in a funny sort of way. Again, come over to my content here and I'm going to type splat. I'm going to grab this thing called Splat 05, not the MOV, but the actual splat. Just drag it out like that. What I'm interested in is not this animation, but the actual shape. So I'm going to drag that out into a new group and make that group 2D. And I'm going to delete that original splat group because I'm not interested in their animation. I'm just interested in, if we turn it on, this shape here. And although it's got an animation, we'll actually only end up using this end part of it. So don't worry about any of that. So we're going to take that shape and we're going to come to Object and make particles. And we are going to come to the inspector. We want to choose Image for the shape. And we want to grab our text group and drag it into there. We want to set the arrangement to random fill and we want to turn the emission alpha down to 0. So I'm going to sort out the birth rate in just 1 second. First of all, I want to set the angle randomness to 360. We want to set the scale to 50% and the scale randomness to 100%. Then what I want to do is I want to group that emitter. So right click group and I want to add an image mask to this group. And I want that image mask to be our text group. So drag that in there. Remember to turn the text group back on again. And we're going to invert the mask. And then I'm going to take the mask and I'm going to come to Filters and Stylize and Crystallize. And I want to turn the speed down to nothing and maybe set this size to something like 15. We might come back and revisit that. It's going to allow the paint to overlap the text, which I think is going to be quite nice. So then let's come back to our emitter. Let's quickly give it some color. So color mode, pick from color range. Let's grab rainbow and let's open up the color range. Let's delete every other tab like that. Let's align them like this with that button at the bottom. That's good enough. I mean, really, I'm not going to worry too much about the colors. You can pick whatever you want. So let's now come back and sort out the birth rate. Let's come to frame 20. Let's set the birth rate to 0 and keyframe it. Let's step forward 1 frame to frame 21. Let's set the birth rate to something like 2000. Let's step forward 1 more frame to frame 22 and set that birth rate back down to 0. Let's also just for safety set that life to 10, but I think we're probably all right. Okay, speed. Let's set that speed to 500 and the speed randomness to 1500. So that's going to fire it off pretty fast like that, and it's going to keep going. So we don't want it to keep going. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to simulations and drag. I want to turn off Y, turn on Z, and set the amount to 5. And now it's going to do that, but then we want to duplicate this drag. We want to turn off X and Z and turn on Y and set this amount to 4. So now cumulatively we're going to get that. So you get that effect of the paint spraying out and then stopping, which is why drag is really so useful. So it's not yet looking much like paint, but then we're going to come to this enclosing group here and we're going to add a blur, Gaussian blur. We're going to add color and levels. We're going to add where we stylize and indent. Let's turn that indent softness all the way up to 1. Let's set the Gaussian blur amount to 64. And then for our levels, let's open up the alpha and then let's bring this in like this, bring these closer together like so. Probably come back and readjust that later on, because what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate what we've just done. So select all 3 of those, duplicate, and then we need to move them all up to the top of the stack. So I think we can do that by coming to object and bring forward. And it hasn't done all of them, has it? Really rather annoying. Object, bring forward. There you go. So I don't know why it left one of them behind. And it's definitely starting to look more like paint now, as you can see. So what I might do with our final indent, this copy at the top here, is possibly increase the depth like that all the way to 20%. Maybe increase the highlight brightness all the way up like that. There's just one effect I want to add on top of that, and that's filters and stylize and extrude. And I just want a distance of 5 and an angle of 270. And if I just toggle that on and off, you can see it just gives us a lot more sense of 3D depth to that, and also sharpens up the edges quite a bit as well. So then it's looking like this. Now you'll notice that it's wobbling a bit, and what we need to do is set this group to 3D. And then if I play it again, it's nice and stable. You might not have noticed that, but it is wobbling because of the various things that are being concatenated there. So then we need to animate our text. So let's come to frame 20. Let's come to our text itself. Let's open up the position, keyframe the Z. Let's come to the first frame, set that Z position to something like 2000. So then it's going to slam back like that and splat out like that. Then I want to close everything up here, and I want to make a new group at the top, and I want to put everything into this new group, and I want to turn this group to 3D. I want to add a camera, and we need to do a little bit of camera shake. So to get camera shake, let's come over to properties. Let's right click on the position, add parameter behavior, randomize. So let us come to frame 19 and let's keyframe the amount, set it down to 0. Let's step forward 1 frame. Let's set the amount to 50. Let's come forward to, I think, 35 frames and set that amount down to 0. And let's set the apply mode to add and subtract. And now we are going to get that camera shake. So we'll obviously need to turn on motion blur. So let's do that, turn on motion blur. But the default motion blur is much too much. Let's set the shutter angle to 180 over here in the project properties. And then hopefully this will play back like that. So we don't really want the text appearing from here. So let's keyframe it. So we're coming from above, I think. So let us come to frame 20. Let's keyframe the Y position. Let's come to the first frame and just move it up like that. So we're just off the edge of the screen. So like, I don't know, 200 or something. And then that's going to look like that. I'm just going to turn off motion blur because it's slowing us down. So looks like that. Maybe it could come from further away. Let's go for 2500 on that Z position. There you go, that's probably better. So the paint just sort of stays static once it's finished. And we can actually do something here with, I think, the original Gaussian blur. So if we change its mix value, you can see that we can get the paint to spread out. So if I come to frame 20 and we keyframe that mix value at 0, and then we come to the end and set it to 100%, we should actually now see the paint continue to spread just a little bit like that. And I think that's much nicer because the paint wouldn't sort of stop dead once it's splatted. So that's more or less it, I think. I do want to come back into this image mask here and this crystallize and just point out what it's doing. So if I turn it off, you can see we've got a much more sort of uniform spread of the paint there. So if we wanted to get it to clear the text a little bit more, what we could do is select the image mask and come to filters and stylize and min-max. And then we could switch to maximum, and then we should just increase that radius. And you see as we do so, we're getting the paint to not encroach quite so much. So let's go for 2 on that min-max. So the only other thing I want to point out is that the initial splat, we're getting an awful lot of paint right at the beginning there, and we could adjust that. Let's come to our emitter itself, and let's add a min-max to that. So stylize min-max, and if we minimize it like that, there you go, that's what I want to do. So I'm going to do this very, very quickly, because if we try to animate the radius too slowly, it's going to look steppy because of the nature of the filter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to frame 20. Let's keyframe that at 11. And let's come forward to, I don't think, probably 30 as much as we can do, and set the radius to 0. I'll just turn that off. You can see the difference. We're getting a lot less paint right at the beginning there. And then it spreads out really quickly. So let's have a look at that. So that really is the effect. I might just drop in a light just while we're at it. Light. Let's set its Z position to something like 2100 because we want to make sure that our text is lit at the front. Let's also just move it up on Y to something like 500. And we want to increase that intensity quite a bit. So let's go for 750, I think. So finally, I want to point out that the effect is fully procedural. So if we were to come back into our text and type instead the word paint, you could see that everything updates perfectly like so. So there you go. That's the effect. I hope you've enjoyed that. Apologies for the cold, and I hope you can join me again when I'm feeling a little bit better. Thanks for watching.